Okay, hope everybody's doing well. It's nice to see all of you. We'll continue with our study of Rashi. It's Friday, Erev Shabbos, Asar B'Teves, and so we will do a Rashi from the sixth Aliyah for today. Yesterday we talked a little bit about Yaakov's departure from the land of Canaan. He's on his way to Mitzrayim. He's finally convinced by the sight of the Agalos, which Yosef sends him to be able to come down and see him despite his fears and apprehensions. And now he's on his way, and they're headed down, the 70 souls that come down with him to the land of Egypt. They're on their way. And as they get closer, he dispatches Yehuda to go ahead of him. And the pasuk says right at the beginning of our Aliyah, Ves Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef. First, he sends Yehuda ahead of him towards Yosef into Egypt. I imagine that they all leave Eretz Canaan together. They're traveling. They camp somewhere near, the border of Egypt as they're getting closer. And Yaakov says, before I go in, I want you to go in first. And he sends Yehuda to Yosef. And the pasuk tells us why. Lahoros lefanav Goshna, in order to be Lahoros, in front of him, the land of Goshen. Vayavo arza Goshen. And then they, meaning Yaakov and the rest of them, come to Goshen. So the question is, what's Lahoros lefanav? Lahoros comes from the word hora, to teach. So the English here says to show the way. Lahoros is to show the way ahead of him to Goshen, like a navigator of sorts. Lahoros, Rashi points out, is more really related to teaching than to showing. So the English here is a little bit imprecise. Lahoros lefanav kitargumo, lefanos lo makom, lahoros heich yisyashev sham. Rashi says, based on the Targum, that lahoros is not just to show the way. That's loosely how we might translate the pasuk, but the word here is related to teaching. It's related to the teaching of how they should settle the area, right? If you were to send a scout ahead of you to scope out a certain place, really what you're sending them for is to get enough information to teach you how to be most successful when you enter. Right, so if you send a scout to navigate the way, so they're about to come back and teach you, okay, make a left here, make a right here, go straight here. If you're sending a scout into, a new neighborhood that you're moving into, so you want them to take a look at the traffic patterns, at the neighbors, at the neighborhood, at the customs of the place, so they can come back and teach it to you, so that you're not a novice when you enter and you're able to acclimate easily to the place that you're moving to. So Lahoros, Rashi says, makes a lot of sense here. He sends Yehuda ahead of him, Lahoros, Lefanav Goshna, to teach him everything about Goshen ahead of time. And once he comes back and teaches him, or once he's prepared to teach him, then Vayavo Artza Goshen. Then they can all come into Goshen afterwards and be able to acclimate easily. So that makes kind of sense in the pasuk. One has to wonder why it's Yehuda that he sends. Could be related to the previous story of Yehuda taking ownership and leadership in order to get Binyamin back from Yosef and rising to this new stature of a leader amongst the tribes. And maybe this is evidence of what's coming in next week's parsha, where Yaakov crowns Yehuda as the progenitor of Malchus. He sees it already. And now the very first mission that they need to go on after Yehuda confronts Yosef in the beginning of our parsha, Vayigash, and becomes the figure of Malchus, the figure of kingship, the figure of leadership, the very first action that needs to be taken, Yaakov now turns to Yehuda. He is the leader, and therefore he goes ahead. That could be one explanation. Could be more related to Yehuda's personality, but that's a shir for another time. But now Rashi quotes a second opinion. What is Lahoros Lefanav Goshna? Umedrash Haggadah, that was the pshat of the pasuk. Now the medrash on the pasuk says, Lahoros Lefanav, Letaken lo beis Talmud, Shemisham Teitze Hora'ah. The language of Lahoros is related to teaching, but it's not just related to teaching the specifics of this particular location and navigating and teaching the customs, but it's related to the highest form of teaching, which is the teaching of Torah, whatever Torah means in the pre-Matan Torah era. But whatever the Masorah, the heritage, the values of Yaakov, whatever he learned in Yeshiva Shem Ve'ever, that's the Torah of their family. And Yaakov says, before I enter Goshen, I want to send someone ahead. I'm sending Yehuda in order to establish a Beis HaTalmud, to establish a yeshiva before I arrive. So Lahoros here is not just to teach the practical side, but to teach Torah. He sends Yehuda ahead of him to teach Torah, to establish a yeshiva before he arrives. Now, what that means, of course, is very strange and what exactly were they learning and who was learning in this yeshiva? And okay, it's a very strange thing. But the Medrash, take yourself out of kind of those pragmatic questions. The Medrash is teaching us such a beautiful and important and crucial point. Yaakov is saying that the basis, the foundation of life is Torah, is yeshiva. If you don't have Torah as the basis of your life, in whatever place you're moving to, in wherever place you're going, wherever place you're establishing yourself, that you're not going to be successful. Yaakov says, before I can enter Goshen, there has to be a foundation and an infrastructure of Torah. And if that's true, then I can meet any challenges that come my way. I can move there and figure the rest out. But if I don't have that foundation and that base, I'll never reach the higher levels that I wish to reach. Now, one could take this on two different planes, especially in the story here with Yaakov going to Egypt. On the one hand, one could say the reason he thought it was so crucial is because he knew that he would be subject to the cultural influences of this foreign land of Egypt, which he wasn't keen on. And in order to act as a buffer, as a protection, he had to have extra strengthening of Torah to protect him from the influences of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry, of Egyptian culture. That's one very limited view, but I'm taking the more expansive view. He's saying it not here because he needs protection from the Egyptians, but because no matter where you are moving into the most beautiful place and most, conducive place to Jewish life, you would still need to establish a Beis HaTalmud. You still need to establish yeshiva. And it's the story of American Jewish life as well. Certainly the case in Europe, but even more so in America. You see the communities around the country that have been successful at maintaining Jewish life were ones that had a day school, ones that established Torah and established the teaching of Torah as a mainstay and a foundation of the community at the very onset, sometimes even before the shuls are established. Those are the communities that thrive. Those are the communities that succeed. That lesson is already learned over here by Yehuda and taught to us by Yaakov. And one lesson that hope that we can take to heart. We're not necessarily establishing communities, but we can make Torah a central part of our life and the foundation upon which we rest. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great Shabbos. And an easy
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
Shabbos.
you.
Have a good
Hey, good
Shabbos.
Shabbos to you.
Shalom. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Take care, everyone.
So, Rabbi, I very much appreciate your message. It's certainly valid. I'll admit that at the shot level, I've always had trouble with the idea that there are all these yeshivot.
Yeah.
My favorite comment recently, and then it's Steve, why was Yitzchak, why was Yaakov, he had no money and stuff for the bride. Wouldn't Yaakov and Rivka have given him money when he fled to Laban? He spent it all on the tuition for Yeshiva Shem B'Eva.
I love it. That had to have come from the Netziv as a yeshiva administrator.
Exactly. It was really interesting. But again, the message certainly very valid.
I love that. That's great. Thank you for adding that.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, easy pass, all of that. Thank you so much, as always.
Everybody.
Welcome. Bye.